Welcome to the On Your Mind podcast, where we believe mental illness can be temporary and transformative. Stay tuned for innovative, effective tools from experts in the field of mental health. Hosted by Timothy J. Hayes, psychologist. This podcast aims to change the narrative around mental illness. Move from a place of fear to a place of hope and solutions. Here on Your Mind.
Michael Caven is a visionary restaurateur who co-founded the USA's first LGBT-themed restaurant, Out on Main, in Columbus, Ohio. Prior to Out on Main, Michael Caven was enmeshed in the gay bar empire soap opera of his adopted father, mogul Frank Caven, in Dallas, Texas. Michael Caven was also the main student witness in the New Hampshire pornography trial of his former high school teacher, Larry Lane Bateman, ensuring that Bateman was permanently removed from the education system, including his final position at Phillips Exeter Academy. Michael Caven is semi-retired in central Vietnam and is a business communication specialist at the University of Economics in Da Nang, as well as a practicing clinical counselor at Psychologist Vietnam Mental Health Clinic. He's currently spearheading Vietnam's suicide prevention hotline. Michael earned a BFA from Southern Methodist University and a Master's of Science in Education from the University of Dayton. Michael Caven received the Equality Award from the Human Rights Campaign, the Living Legend Award from Audi magazine. His memoir, Spilling the Tea, is in development. Please note that this interview covers rather intense topics related to child abuse, sexual abuse of children, and child pornography, as well as Michael's work to recover from the abuse he sustained earlier in life and his work to advocate for male victims of sexual abuse. Well, Michael, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for having me, Dr. Hayes, and greetings to you and your viewers and listeners from Da Nang, Vietnam.
It's an exciting thing for me to be able to talk to you about your memoir that's in process, and I'm hoping you can tell me what went into your decision to write a memoir like this.
Well, thank you. It's a great question, and it's very appropriate, and Vietnam does kind of play a role in it. Back in the summer of 2023, I was sitting out on the beach. One of the reasons why I semi-retired and moved to the other side of the world was to find a place with beautiful mountains and beaches. And I certainly found it here in Da Nang, Vietnam, a city in the central part of Vietnam, coastal city. And I was sitting out on the beach and just kind of reminiscing about my Dallas years. They were quite colorful years of my life. And I just began writing. I began writing about my arch nemesis, my big rival during that time, Dennis. And, a few paragraphs became a chapter. 1,000 words became 5,000 words, and I just kept going with it. And I did some research about, memoir and memoir writing and what's expected in a memoir. And I learned that each memoir generally should have 3 acts. And I look back at my life and, I have 3 acts that I can definitely be talking about and writing about. So my writing expanded from my Dallas years to more recently, the last part of my story, which was co-founding the first LGBT-themed restaurant in the United States in 1996 in Columbus, Ohio. But then much earlier than that, I also write about my adventures in a gay bar empire. Back when I was 20, all of 20 with $20 in my pocket and quite destitute. And then also another story, another one of my acts is confronting a predator high school teacher and bringing him to justice. So, those are my 3 stories, and those are big stories. Those are big stories, but they did end 22 years ago. So what have I been doing in the last 22 years? Well, we were just talking about that I've semi-retired and I live here in central Vietnam. I decided to downsize in 2015. I was kind of worn out of life in Philadelphia and in the West in general, just lots of overhead and lots of stress and an unhappy relationship. And I'd always wanted to come to the other side of the world. And I sold my house, gave away my clothes, my professional clothes, sold my car, and started in Australia. and I spent a month in Australia. Then I looked at the map. Okay, Bali, I'll go to Indonesia, spend some time there. And then I looked at the map. I'm like, okay, well, Vietnam, why not Vietnam? I'll spend a month or two here. And I wasn't even quite sure about the relationship between the two countries. I didn't even know if I would be welcome as an American. I just didn't know back then. But I learned pretty quickly that relationship between the two countries had normalized and that I was very welcome here. And in my first year in Vietnam, I stayed in Airbnbs. I was on my own. I lived with many different types of families in the north, in the south, and in central Vietnam as I explored this beautiful country, and developed fantastic friendships. And I was just deeply moved by the authenticity of the people and their genuine interest in chatting with people like me and getting to know people like me, foreigners, and practicing English and wanting to engage with the world. So slowly but surely, I learned that this is a place. And in 2017, I realized, wow, I can build a life here after having left Vietnam and traveled to other places that were on my bucket list. But I did make it back here in 2017 to build a life. And that's what I've done. And just to, be current about what I'm doing now, I'm a business communication specialist, lecturer at a university here in Da Nang. And I'm also a practicing psychotherapist at a local mental health clinic where I see clients on Saturday mornings. So it's an unexpected life that I get to live here. I didn't know when I left in 2015, what the future was going to bring, but I had faith. I knew that it would unfold, and it really has unfolded. And I am so grateful that I get to live over here in this side of the world. The rules are different, but it's okay. I respect where I live, and I'm keen to, be respectful and, follow the rules, and I certainly do. So that's how I came to be here, and that's how I came to be out on that beach, Mi An Beach here in Da Nang, back in the summer of 2023 when I began writing. And all of that writing, I didn't know at the time that it would substantially kind of change my life. Because before that, my life and the interesting parts of it, were pretty compartmentalized, meaning that if you put my name into Google, Michael Caven, there are 7 or 8 Michael Cavens around the world. Yes, and their stuff comes up, but none of the more colorful stuff of my past would come up. So, this whole writing the memoir, having coaches, working with editors, working on story and structure. And, we all have a book within us. We all have a memoir. It's just a matter of getting it on the page, getting the words on the page as hell. But I just dove into it and learned as much as I could about the craft. And I think I put together, a memoir. The name of it is Spilling the Tea, which is kind of a gay expression of kind of letting out all the news, the gossip, the interesting adventures of your life. And so spilling the tea is like sharing gossip. So that's the name of my memoir. And while I'm thinking about it, if you're watching this, check out my Facebook page, Michael Caven Writer. And if you want to help me out, follow me, because really what I'm doing now as a budding memoirist is I'm getting my story out there. I'm doing interviews like this to get my story out there, to build a following, because it's an interesting story. It's a compelling story. And you and I are going to talk more in depth about it as we proceed here. But it's a story worth reading, not just for its entertainment value, but for the universal themes of resilience, not giving up, yes, and dealing with incredibly difficult situations as best as possible. And now, as a 61-year-old, extending compassion to myself and forgiveness for my follies, for the craziness of my 20s, which was just bonkers. And I can look back at it now, with hopefully some sobriety, and that we all can perhaps learn from some of these adventures that I've been on. So that's why I come to be here, Dr. Hayes. And I just want to say thank you for your legacy of 50 years of being a caregiver and supporting your clients. Lots of PTSD. I know you've worked extensively with PTSD, and thank you for your legacy and what you've given back to the world. Insofar as helping people and helping others, helping us to recover, helping us to heal, and helping us to be our higher and better selves.
Well, you're very welcome and deserving, as I like to say. If you would just take a breath and get centered and get us started on this journey. How did you come to be?
Well, I was born in Augusta, Georgia, at a military base. And of course, I don't remember that time at much. Um, but um, but my mom and dad, they really didn't have a whole lot in common, except, the passion that they shared. And they were done after about a year. My biological father had a lot of severe mental psychiatric issues, bipolar 1, psychotic issues, psychotic features, and so on. So they didn't last. But I began life surrounded by very powerful, strong women who had opinions about who I should be, what I should be. And at the time I was a kid, with a lot of hair. I was very effeminate. I wasn't quite sure if I was a boy or a girl half the time. And I think that, my effeminacy was quite alarming for my mom. And she wanted me to have a male figure, have a stepfather. And a few years later, by the time I was 9 or 10, she did remarry, so that I could have a male influence. That was a big part of it. As I write in my memoir, mostly though to bulldoze the homo out of me. They were determined to make me a man, and that I would not be effeminate and sound like a girl and act like a girl. So yeah, my stepfather taught me how to throw a baseball. I learned how to play lacrosse. I manned up. I was put in the very uncomfortable position of sports and athletics, and I was a very artistic kid, and bashing into people, banging into people, and that type of physical, really wasn't what I was, up for, but I really didn't have a choice. And I became a star lacrosse player in the ninth and 10th grade in high school. But things at home were worsening. There was a lot of chaos between my mom and stepdad. It was like War of the Roses with them. And me and the dog, we were kind of on the side bystanders to all of this insanity. And at high school, I was befriended by a teacher, drama teacher. He taught English, speech, drama, and so on. And I would chat with him. His name was Larry Lane Bateman, Dr. Bateman. We called him Doc Bateman. And he was adored. I mean, we just worshiped him. He was an amazing teacher. And I would chat with him when he was on hall duty during lunch, just the two of us. And, he seemed concerned about my family life. I talked about what was going on at home. He asked many questions. He seemed, very concerned in class. I got all high marks with, lots of, written comments about my strengths in speech and in English. I just worshiped him. I worshiped him, looked up to him, and he was a male figure who was listening to me, listening to me talking about what was going on. And I didn't know who I was. I didn't know that I was gay. I just knew that I was different for sure, and I knew that I didn't fit in for sure. And he was a welcome respite. So I didn't know at the time that everything he was doing, insofar as befriending me and gaining my trust, was grooming. I was 15 years old, 15, okay, on Long Island. But he knew what he was doing. He'd been to this rodeo numerous times in the past. And unbeknownst to me, and I don't know about my high school, but he had built a career writing about the joys and great things that go with male teachers seducing male students. That's what he wrote his dissertation on. If you can believe it, it's true. And I guess my school never read it or didn't care or didn't understand. But that's what he was all about. That was his whole deal. And a year later, he suggested an out of school, away from school video project at his home, which I was complimented and I was eager and I felt special. And I felt like he had identified me for my, talents and my ability on stage. And so I eagerly agreed, but he said, keep it a secret. Don't want anyone to get jealous. So he picked me up from school one Saturday morning. I had walked there from home, and at his house, as again, the manipulation and the seduction process continued, he gave me alcohol, marijuana, showed, he had pornography in different parts of the house. Wherever I would go, there would be pornography magazines, pictures. And he laid out this scenario for this video project that he wanted us to do. And the scenario is that my character is a 16-year-old male student, who had just returned home. He'd been outed at high school as being homosexual, and he was in a lot of shame, embarrassment, feeling totally exposed. And this character that Dr. Bateman was talking about goes home, lots of shame, looks in the mirror, tears, and decides to kill himself. Now, this is an old trope with, gay life in the 50s and 60s. It was always a bad ending. Many times it led to suicide. That's kind of how he operated. So that's what we did. And he was able to manipulate me out of my clothes. I willingly took my clothes off in the bathroom for this, slitting my wrists in the tub. It sounds awful, but it's true. It's awful that he did that. And we put tea leaves on my wrists, so when you put them in the water, when you put your arm in the water, it looks like blood is coming out. So we did that. And then, look, I don't want to traumatize your viewers, and I've done a lot of therapy on this over the years, so I can talk about it. And yes, I feel emotions, but I'm not traumatizing myself by talking about this stuff. But I don't want to traumatize your viewers. So, I'll just say, because I think we all know where this is going,
Right.
that, we eventually wound up in his bedroom, with pornography, marijuana, amyl nitrate, which is known as poppers, which kind of temporarily leaves you out of your body. And he did what he did, and he basically framed it for me that if we don't do this, he's going to lose. I'm going to lose him as my friend. So that's what he was holding over me, was our friendship and his role in my life. And I felt like he had a lot of answers about the questions that I had about my emerging sexuality, who I
Well, and he
am.
was he was an authority figure,
He
and
was. He was.
he was paying
Yes,
attention to you, so
that's
you
right.
felt appreciated and heard.
I do. I did. And, in many ways, it was like on my forehead was a neon sign saying, needy boy from a crazy family, ready for taking.
Right.
And any predator will tell you that a 15, 16-year-old adolescent boy is an easy prey, especially for somebody who knows what they're doing, especially someone who uses, pornography, alcohol, drugs to lower your defenses and to have his way. So
So did this
after
develop into a relationship?
it did. Now let's go back though to the bedroom to memorialize this thing that we did, that he did. He said, "I'd like to take Polaroid pictures of you to memorialize, your young beauty and all of that." And I agreed. And so he took sexually explicit Polaroids of me. Um, and um, and yes, look, let's be clear. I was a vulnerable kid and I did fall in love with him. I fell in love with the image that he and I could wake up together as partners, that he could be my protector, that he could answer all of my questions about who I am and who I'm going to be and my emerging sexuality. So yes, I mean, I had emotions, I had feelings. Uh, I wanted something as any 16-year-old would who was vulnerable. Yes. And yes, there was a big age difference, and he was not my own age. And I didn't really find him particularly attractive, but I did find the attention, yes, to be very appealing. Yes, and to pull me in. It was a big hook, the attention that he gave me. And we did meet a few more times after that. And then about maybe 3 weeks later, he announced to me that our relationship had to end, that we couldn't go on like this, and that he encouraged me to connect with other people my age. And I, at the time, did not know what he had done. It's not that I was in denial. How could I be in denial for something that I really just didn't know? I thought he was my friend. I thought he was on my side. I thought he had my best interest. I thought he helped me to find out stuff that on my own I could not find out. Now let's remember, this was before the internet.
Right.
This was before, as a young person, you could go on and find resources online. There was nothing. I was living on Long Island, and so he was kind of a bridge to my future. At least that's what I envisioned. So yes, I mean, I did fall, and yes, it really hurt when he made that announcement. But life went on, and I was on my way. And as a prosecutor would say, years later, at his trial, we don't know what the future for Michael Caven held, although we have our suspicions. We do know that Larry Lane Bateman just helped him along his way. That nothing that Larry Lane Bateman did was a positive, affirming choice. Yes. Nothing that he did was mentorship and coaching and looking toward the future in a professional way with correct boundaries, like many teachers do. Many teachers inspire their students. Yes, and some teachers are in their students' lives for many years as mentors, and that is a good thing. I'm
And
friends
this
with
and
students
this
here.
wasn't that.
This was not that.
Yeah.
It was not. And so but there I am, and he left my high school when I was a senior. He got laid off and he wound up getting a plum job at Phillips Exeter Academy as their drama chair. So he left my senior year. He was gone. I didn't, again, I just, I didn't know the impact that he had on me, other than I knew that it was time to get out there and see the world and see the gay world. And on my own, I discovered some gay bars on Long Island,
And
and
what year was that you graduated?
1981.
Okay.
Yeah. 1981. So yes, my last year at school, things were beginning to go really downhill. And let's just, get back to family of origin. I was born, Dr. Hayes, with alcohol in my breath, practically. Alcoholism on both sides of my family go back many generations. So I was born alcoholic. I was drinking alcoholically. The first drink I had, I was there and I was home and I loved it. I was like, well, this is much better than sober life, to be drinking. And I'd be drinking my parents' alcohol, taking my mother's painkillers and pills, and I'd be watching the PTL Club and praising the Lord with Tammy Faye Baker and crying. Of course, she was crying because she was taking Valium. I was crying because I was taking Valium. And I'd meet her years later. Years later, I would meet Tammy Faye Baker, and I'd say, Tammy Faye, I was calling the PTL club asking them to talk to you. I mean, I was a mess girl. I was taking Valium just like you were, crying, and we laughed. And she said I'm not the first that she's heard that from. But yeah, it was chaos. And going into my senior year was chaos. And eventually I would leave Long Island and head to Florida, of all places, and try to find my way. But I was totally unequipped for life. I was totally unequipped, to deal with the realities of life. But before I left Long Island and before I left New York, I had discovered hustler bars on the east side of Manhattan, which at the time were quite notorious. And young men hustling on streets, the whole trade thing. And for myself, I love the attention. I love going into these bars and sashaying around and showing off and getting, people buying me drinks and buying me dinners and wanting to take me out. I love the attention. And, and I think that, some of it, I mean, a lot of it is I just saw myself, my worth as a sexual object. That was the message I got from Doc Bateman. Yes, it was the message I got from some other caregivers when I was younger who were inappropriate with me. Yes. And so I was off to the races. And I felt like I differentiated myself from other hustlers because I wasn't taking money. I would only accept, gifts, dinners, clothes, but mostly the attention. I love the attention, and of course, drugs, but I love the attention, and I love the affirmation. And it made me feel full, and it made me feel a larger self. And it put all of my doubt, my inner doubt, to the side, at least temporarily, as I became this sought after creature on the east side of Long Island. So, I did that for about a year. It got tough. I'd leave Long Island, leave New York, and head down to Florida, where, I wound up being destitute. I was, arrested a few times for public intoxication, and things were really looking pretty bad. And it was 1983, and I had really just run out of all options. I had $20 in my pocket, and it was July 4th, 1983, and I went to a bar on Kennedy Boulevard called the Old Plantation, and with no future. And I sat at the bar, looked over, and there was this older man, he kind of looked like my grandfather. He reminded me of my grandfather. I don't know if that's a good thing or what. But he smiled and he had Buddy Holly glasses on. He was very large, bloated, lots of broken arteries in his face, from the years of bite of whiskey. And but he smiled and he seemed kind, and we chatted and got to know each other. And I didn't know that I was talking to Frank Caven, who at the time was the biggest gay bar nightclub owner in the country. And I didn't know that when I met Frank, but I learned pretty fast. And he could tell that I was hungry. And he said that he had an organization back in Texas and that they were always looking for young talent and so on. And we proceeded to a drunken Chinese dinner, which then proceeded to his bed, which his nickname for it was the workbench. And for those of you listeners who watch RuPaul, RuPaul says you better work. And yes, I got to work. And a week later, I'd gone from being destitute with $20 in my pocket to moving into Frank's penthouse in Dallas, where he lived. Yes, going from rags to riches overnight. It was remarkable. It was a remarkable change. And we kind of pulled each other up and gave each other what we both needed. But I certainly wasn't the first, number one, in Frank's life, but I was the first young man in his life that wanted more than a car or a bar or money. I wanted an education. Yeah, that's what I wanted. And that kind of differentiated me from the others because I was unique and different. Oh, he wants an education. And I did. I started school at SMU, Southern Methodist University in Dallas, settled into Frank's life, settled into life on his arm, where, when we would go out to his bars, there was always a parting of the waves. And on his arm, people would look at me and snicker and make snide remarks and laugh, point at me, whore, hustler. I hear this. And there were some other folks that looked at me with admiration. But, it was easy for them to hate me and hard for me not to hate myself. But I carried on. And let's be clear, Doc, that when I met Frank, yes, when I was 20 and destitute, I certainly had other options. I could have been a busser in a restaurant and just struggled to get by. I could have done quote unquote legitimate work. But that's not how I was wired. But let's just be clear, no victims here with me and Frank. We were adults. It was not a level playing field financially, but hey, this is what we signed up for. It's what I engaged in of my own, volunteer, my own volition. So, I don't view myself in that relationship ever as a victim at all. And Frank and I, we were both trying to find our way. He had his needs that he wanted to get met. I had needs that I wanted to get met. And as in all relationships, what you bring to the table is what you work with. And we did the best that we could with what we had at the table that we shared.
Well, it's certainly within the context of that relationship, you can say that, and with your age. With hindsight, with knowing about the effects of trauma and childhood trauma on a person and the grooming that you went through from your teacher, it's a whole different story. Yeah. Because
Yes,
that just,
it's a mitigating factor,
well,
right?
yeah, it's what set you up
Right.
for that lifestyle was the fact that
Mhm.
you've already said it at least once, you hated yourself. And so, you're scrambling around from a position of not feeling that you have value, and you're trying to find comfort and distraction from that painful internal life. So it all fits together.
It does. It does. And thank you for saying that. And it is important to remember that. And we haven't talked a lot about my parents and my mom, but boy, they had some bonkers expectations for me to be something that was really out of reach. And but I wanted to please them. I wanted to make them proud. But with these bonkers expectations, it was a lot on my shoulders, that I was carrying, wanting to fulfill their dreams for me. And this is the way that this is the path that I went down. And yes, fate dealt its hand on that July 3rd, 1983, when Frank and I came into each other's life. We would proceed, and I know that this is hard for some of your listeners to hear. We would proceed to engaging in at what at the time was really the only way that two adults could have a legal connection. And we decided a year later, it was my suggestion. I'll take full responsibility for it. That Frank would adopt me as an adult. And back then, it was not uncommon or common, but gay people, adults, would sometimes adopt each other as a way to have a legal connection. And before gay marriage, obviously. So we proceeded to do that. And Frank did adopt me as an adult. We were in the courtroom there in Dallas with all these kids and their adoptive parents and cakes and balloons. And there's Frank and I. And the judge was like, yes, of course, I'll grant the adoption, but you don't have to come sit on my lap if you don't want to. We all laughed and everything. So Frank did adopt me, and we proceeded into a father-son relationship with benefits, to be quite honest. And Frank had an interest in politics. And so we began, doing political work. Frank was gay, but he was a staunch Republican. And so we began, Frank became a major donor. I know this is crazy for the Republican Party. And we wound up going to, and this was in 1984, the Reagan era. And Reagan, I think at that point was reelected. Maybe, I don't know. I think he was reelected in 1984, maybe, or maybe he was. I forget the history. But in any case, so we went to Washington. We went to fancy parties. We went to the White House a couple of times. Frank and we met Ronald Reagan, George Bush. And we have pictures. I've got pictures to prove it. And he really enjoyed, being a major donor. And I don't know if the Republican Party, I think eventually they caught on. There was no internet back then. It wasn't so easy to do, checks on people.
Right.
But still, they were happy to take his money. And we had some really very interesting experiences. We went to the inauguration in 1985. And there we were, this big gay party, in this room full of Republicans. And so Frank was also, Frank always had deals going. In his career, he had over 60 bars. That's 60 brands that he developed. Most were successful. There were a few duds, but most were very successful, and some were very, very successful. Brands that have gone on in multiple cities. His two big brands was JR's Bar and Grill, and the mining companies. Those were the two big brands of his. And so I did PR for his company, Caven Enterprises. I was going to SMU, and I brought along with me to Dallas from my rags to riches, my addictions, my psychiatric issues. None of that got better, although I did start therapy because I knew I needed some help. But still, my issues were just raging. And on one hand, you could say I was an obnoxious brat back then. I was at some point, but also I was just way over my head, in a world and in a bar, and in an empire, a gay bar empire full of intrigue, and everyone vying for Frank's attention and to be Frank's number one, Frank's right-hand man, Frank's this, Frank's that. So I was really amongst people who were in it to win it, and I was just way over my head. But did the best that I could at the time, was going to school, but I was acting out and had alcohol and drug relapses and wound up in treatment for my first treatment experience. And Frank came to treatment. We talked a lot with the counselor. We decided that this father-son with benefits needed to end, and we just needed to be father-son, and that I would move out of the penthouse in the sky and move into the dorm at SMU, and have a more realistically based life. So Frank and I decided to do that, and then we proceeded into a healthier, hopefully, relationship. He was proud of me. He was proud of me going to school. We loved each other. We did love each other. But he also, had his needs, and with me out of the house, it was time for him to find another number one, and on and on and on. And so we also worked on a bar in Washington. We'd been going to Washington for those political things, and we felt that the bar scene was pretty light. for gay people. So we wanted to bring his JR's brand to DC. We did, and I did a lot of traveling those few summers, studying overseas. But when I returned from Russia, an SMU in Russia trip, Frank asked me, he said, look, he said, at university, you're learning to be a drama-rama uh, ballerina. He says, I need you to be thinking about the business. I need an heir for the business, for these businesses. And so I took a year off and went to Washington and learned the business and opened and ran his JR's brand in Washington, D.C. Unfortunately, 2 weeks after I left DC to do that, Frank had a stroke. He was never the same. He was always under the eye of other gatekeepers, and I was on my way out. So long story short, that chapter of my life ended when Frank passed away. I graduated from school, thankfully, and Frank did a lot for me in his lifetime. And one of the best things he did for me, Dr. Hayes, was he did not leave any percentage of the business to me, and I'm so grateful that he didn't. At the time, I wasn't. He did leave me some money, but at the time, I wasn't. But now, when I look back on it, any amount of money back then would have killed me, and I would have missed this life ahead. So, in his wisdom, he knew that, and also I had been disloyal because I had resigned and left to finish my last year at school. And all the other gatekeepers, again, there was all this intrigue. And I write about it in my memoir. And for your listeners, and I think especially for gay men of a certain age, gay men remember back in the day when there were gay bars, gay bar owners were always the most interesting people in the world. Yes. And there was always drama and intrigue with gay bars. And I write about these characters a lot in Spilling the Tea. And there were some very, very big characters in his life and part of that whole drama. And it was a soap opera. And in the end, I didn't fulfill my commitment to Frank. I didn't fulfill my part of the arrangement. And I look back on that now and, I own it. I own that. And I do feel bad about it. I wish that I could have done better. But it was a very complicated relationship. And I think
Now
that,
that's putting it mildly.
mhm. Yes, yes, yes. And I had a future ahead. And that future was not as a gay bar manager or even as a gay bar owner. I had many other things ahead that I wanted to do that were on the horizon. I just didn't know what they were. But I graduated SMU and made my way to my first job after graduation, which was with Neiman Marcus in their buyer development program. They found me kind of interesting. They knew some of my story and they like interesting characters in fashion retail. Surprise, And so I got this plum job after graduation. Frank had passed away. And then maybe 6 months later, I'm working in this job and I'm not good at it. I'm not good at retail, but I'm a great actor. And somehow I'm getting through with all of my stuff going on and with dealing with Frank's passing and with going into a new chapter of my life. I received a package in the mail from New Hampshire, and it was a videotape, and it was an envelope filled with Polaroids, those sexually explicit Polaroids that Larry Lane Bateman had made of me 10 years earlier. And I opened up the package, I looked at the Polaroids, and I saw myself. And it had been 10 years, around 10 years since that had happened. I was probably 26 when I received this package from Larry Lane Bateman, and it was 10 years earlier when he had done what he did. And I remember looking at my face going, oh my God, who is this boy? Is he having fun? He looks kind of lost, kind of intoxicated. My eyes were glazed over. I was smiling. What kind of a smile was that? With my legs up in the air, and other parts of my body being objectified in those Polaroids. And I'm thinking to myself, this guy, wow. I mean, now looking at that, he had the audacity to send those to me. He really must have thought he had me in the bag. By then he must have thought that I would be a fellow perpetrator like him, that he could send that and not worry that it wouldn't be a red flag for me, you know? So it was a red flag, but I still was not conscious. I did not I still wasn't putting it together, but I was beginning to. And in fact, I was writing at the time, and I wrote a play about my life and about these very dominant women in my life, and I even sent it to him. And I think it was a warning flag for him that I was beginning to get warm, that I was beginning to look at my life and look at things that had happened, and eventually I might set my sights on what he did, right? But in any case, I looked at, these Polaroids and I was really kind of shook up. And I felt a lot of sadness inside. I just really wasn't connecting the dots. And then the pornography was similar pornography to what he had showed me when I was 16. Yes, a mix of pornography, some of it legal, some of it illegal. And then in subsequent days and weeks, he would send more tapes and picture books, big cases of it. And again, the pornography was mixed. And I would say to him, after a few shipments, thanks for sending this. But really stop sending me this kids stuff because it just doesn't sit well with me. I'm not comfortable with it. And he'd stop, and then a few weeks later, he'd start to include it again. Um, and so I'm, compulsively masturbating 3 or 4 times a day with this motherlode pornography collection. And you're a psychologist, sexual compulsion, compulsive masturbation, it's very similar to drugs and alcohol. There's a
The
lot going on in
endorphin
the
release
brain.
in the brain is a tremendous painkiller and
Absolutely.
distraction.
Absolutely. And nobody wants to talk or think about compulsive masturbation, but it is something that a lot of people struggle with at various times in their lives for various reasons. We know that, masturbation and sexuality ought to be healthy. It ought to be joyful. It's a great gift that the universe gives us to have, when we can have good experiences. And where was I? I'm sorry.
You were just saying that because he was sending you all that stuff, you
Yes, yes,
you were
yes.
having
Right.
times of just getting lost in that
Lost.
stimulation and numbing out from it.
That's right. Numbing out. And you're right, numbing out. And, by then, I had come to see that sex was my friend. If I was feeling bad, I'd have sex with someone hot, feel better about myself. But then again, there was always the emptiness inside afterward, after they would leave, after the one night stand. And it was the same thing with the compulsive masturbation. There was always the hole inside afterward. Temporarily, the endorphins, like you say, the dopamine, it floods the brain. But then afterward, we're stuck with ourselves. I was stuck with myself.
Yeah, there's no
Uh,
healing happening when you're distracting, whether it's drugs or spending money you don't have or gambling or sex. There's no healing happening with that.
That's right. That's right. And it's not empowerment. It's not empowerment in the way that you and I know empowerment can be. And it'll take a little while, but eventually, Doc, I get to the empowerment. So let's pick it up where I got a job opportunity in Ohio a few months later, moved to Columbus, Ohio, took all of his porn in the big cases, and started this new job with the Limited. And within a few weeks, I bottomed out yet again, drinking and drugging and bad situations. And the Limited, they gave me some time off to do some outpatient therapy. I was making more money, and I had better insurance, so I could afford the copay for mental health for therapy. And I began therapy. I began therapy. I could finally do it. I'd wanted to do it for years. And I started the therapy. My psychologist, Dr. Howard Fratkin, unbeknownst to me, at the time, he was a budding advocate for male survivors of sexual abuse. He would go on to become a national advocate with Oprah and Tyler Perry and so on. But I didn't know at the time. I didn't know any of this. And I didn't know him. And I sat as close to his door to bolt out of the office as possible in the first few sessions. I didn't trust him. I didn't trust anybody. But he was the first gay man in my life in a position of power that didn't put the moves on me. Didn't put the moves on me, which was new. And about the third session, after this outpouring of my life story and going through all of the history, I looked at Howard, and it was though the ceiling just came off his office and the sky was up there. And then the sun was just shining down into my face. And I went, oh my God, he wasn't my friend. He took advantage of me. And the tears began to flow, and it was though the white light was just overpowering me as I came to see what I had been in denial about all these years, that Larry Lane Bateman had taken advantage of me. It was not a level playing field. It could never have been a level playing field. I was 15. and 16.
Well, and
He could not.
he was nothing more than a predator in that role with you.
That's right. That's right. So this realization in counseling, then, Doc, I learned about empowerment because I learned that I could be empowered and that jerking off, having a one night stand, snorting coke, drinking, that's not empowerment. That's not empowerment. But I could find ways as a male survivor to believe in myself, to tell my story, to work through the shame. Because we know, and you know, that shame is so overwhelming. And shame is why we are where we are at now, where male survivors of sexual abuse are concerned. Because, and this is really part of my argument and why I'm doing what I'm doing, besides the fact that I got to the point of no return with my memoir, meaning it got to the point where I must publish this. This story must be told. And they say memoirists, you get to the point where it becomes non-negotiable. Okay, so I am okay. Where was I? I'm sorry, I lost my
In the room with the therapist, you
right
finally
in the room. That's
realized
right.
that the
That's right.
teacher from high school had been
Right.
a
Right.
predator, not a
That's
friend.
right. That's right. And then I began to move into real empowerment. Yes, which is what I just described, which is much different than the old lies, which were not empowerment, which just continued to deepen the shame, deepen the pain. So I was on the right track now, and he introduced me to a book. At the time, it was really the only book available for male survivors by Mike Liu called Victims No Longer. It was a game changer for me because he was writing my story. And I came to see, wow, I'm not alone. There are others who have been through this. We did a lot of gut-wrenching work together. I had also partnered up with someone my own age in Columbus, Tom. Yes, and we would go on to be life partners for 10 years. And he and Howard, I said to both of them, okay, guys, here we are. I'm getting well now. I'm not as depressed. The depression is lifting. I'm seeing things now that I have not seen before. What do I do with all this porn? What do I do about the teacher? And, Howard said, it's your decision. There's no right or wrong. But if you're thinking about the legalities of it, talk to a family attorney and get the family attorney's feedback. So I did, and I found a family attorney in Columbus, I told her everything. And her question to me was, what do you want? And I said, well, I want him not to do to other boys what he did to me. I want him removed from the education system. And she said, okay, well, here's how. And then the bad news came. Because, to do this, yes, well, first of all, he can't be held accountable because of the laws, and I forget what the expression is, but he could not
Statute
be
of
prosecuted.
limitations.
Thank you, statute of limitations. He couldn't be prosecuted on that. But then again, there's the porn, and then again, there are the Polaroids that he sent me of myself, sexually explicit Polaroids that he sent me of that he took of me when at 16. So, where Tom and Howard were concerned, my therapist and my then partner, they were like, you have to follow your heart, whatever you feel is best. And the family attorney, we were very clear with her about what I want, and she said, this is how you do it. If you're going to do this, then, she said, I will arrange a immunity for you. You'll turn everything over to the New Hampshire authorities. You'll testify. But eventually, Michael, your story will become public and your identity will become public. The teacher has the right to face you in court. You are an accuser. Everybody has a right to face their accuser. So I had to think long and hard about that, not just for myself and the vanity of people learning that I'd, been in a relationship with a sugar daddy, a big daddy, or other, questionable things I did in my 20s with alcohol, drugs, and on the east side of Manhattan. Yes. Um, but am I prepared for that to become public? Yes. But also, what about him and the people in his life, his then partner, Phillips Exeter Academy? I mean, I knew that this would be an explosion. So I thought long and hard about it for months, just going, I want to make the right decision. I want to make the right decision, and I want to make the decision that I can live with. And so, within a few months, I got to the place where I wanted to be, where I needed to be, which was I have to live with this, my decision. I'm not taking all of this porn to the dumpster and then have on my conscience that that man is still there at Phillips Exeter and wherever else he winds up perpetrating boys. That was unacceptable to me. So we proceeded, and I began the process with the New Hampshire authorities. Eventually, and I go and testify to the grand jury. Eventually, his on-campus apartment was raided. They found a multitude of pornography. They found evidence of him perpetrating other boys on campus. And the trial was set at the state level, then it was transferred to the federal level. And there we were. And eventually, and lots of publicity because this is Phillips Exeter Academy, and a lot of the political elite and royalty, their kids had gone to Phillips Exeter. The issue was, are any of those kids in any of these tapes? It was a meltdown. The school melted down, but we carried on. The trial took place. His defense attorney did what defense attorneys do, which is why many victims, many survivors don't want to come
Don't
forward.
speak up, right?
That's right. And he sat there in that courtroom and waved around those Polaroids for everybody to see. It was disgusting. But that's what they do. Again, trying to get you to react and to get angry. And I didn't. I just watched him do that, because I knew what he was doing. And and the trial proceeded, and I testified. Other students testified as well. And his attorney, begged the jury to find Larry Lane Bateman innocent of one of the four counts, just to show that they questioned my credibility. But they didn't give him that. They found him guilty on everything, including sending me those Polaroids that he took. And he was found guilty. He went to jail. He was permanently removed from the education system. I think he passed away in 2014. So that was the end of that story. And but it's not the end of the story of male victims and how male victims are perceived. Yes, there were some people, his diehard supporters who felt like he and I should share a cell together, a prison cell. The judge, who especially during the sentencing was quite triggered when I testified about my family, said that he didn't believe everything that I said and that Bateman and I were two peas in a pod. That's what the judge said, you know.
Well,
And
and there's been a lot over the years of conflating or mixing up and falsely proclaiming that homosexuality is the same as pedophilia, and it's part of the stigma that you have to be willing to face if you're going to try and speak truth to that situation.
that's right. And, not surprisingly, Vanity Fair, which heretofore had done some good articles about, adult males who had perpetrated male teenagers in previous issues, they got a hold of this story. And they wound up doing a story quite sympathetic to the pedophile molester, Larry Lane Bateman. I mean, it was really remarkable. It was breathtaking what they did to try to create a sympathetic figure and that he was a gay activist before his time and all this other BS. And, they were determined to make me out to be the dastardly hustler who ruined Larry Lane Bateman's life. It was really a disgusting piece of journalism, with lots of nonsense, including creating mysteries that don't exist. But that's what they do, and nothing that Vanity Fair could write, nothing that anyone could say could change the fact that Larry Lane Bateman was removed from the educational system and he was incarcerated. And let's just be clear, child porn is bad, no doubt about it. But this trial of his was a vehicle for him to be held accountable for what he did when I was 16. And let's just be clear, that's exactly what it was. Because again, the statute of limitations had run out. I didn't have that option. And I would do it again and again for the outcome that we had. And then, life did go on, Doc. I mean, the day after the judge shamed me, I mean, he believed me enough to convict Bateman. He believed me enough to convict Bateman, but he had to put it in there, this judge, who, by the way, if you saw that judge, at the we were in the same hotel and he had these very comely clerks around him. If you were to look at him and say that he looked at them as his personal harem, you would not be mistaken. okay, because that was his mindset. And he would eventually leave the bench for sexual harassment of his female clerk. So this is a guy that lean perpetrator, okay? So I guess we shouldn't be surprised. But the day he shamed me in that courtroom in that sentencing hearing, the next day I started a graduate psychology, social work, clinical counseling program, and would proceed over the next 2 years to get my master's. Yes, and to work during my master's, first doing an internship, and then for about 6 months, I worked with sex offenders. Really, I worked with sex offenders, and that drug and alcohol counseling is pretty direct, and you can really get into the client's face to try to break down the ego and denial. It's even more so with sex offender treatment, even more so. And I hated it. I hated the work, but I did find it fascinating, and I was good at it. It was kind of facing the monster, facing the fact that for most of these people, men and women who are sex offenders, they will never get well. The narcissism is so high for these people, the arrogance and the lack of victim empathy, that it's pretty hopeless. The best you can do is contain them, if at all possible. And for the rest of his life, he was contained. I mean, he was monitored for the rest of his life so he wouldn't do to others what he did to me. Good. And I'm not well liked by, allies of predators. Good. Don't like me. I hope I'm taking up a lot of free rent in your mind. Okay? Because the reality is, Doc, is that there is a bit of a double standard when it comes to victimhood. Okay? Male survivors of sexual abuse are just as much victims as women. But there is a knee-jerk reaction in our society and around the world, maybe it's in our DNA, that boys, teen boys, and men should not allow that to happen to them. It's a knee-jerk reaction, and there has been progress over the years. There has been progress over the years insofar as awareness, more understanding, but nowhere near with Me Too and the fact that I think that there's a much better appreciation and understanding and respect, sympathy for what women have endured for eons. Yes, well, men have too, but there is not that level of sympathy and support. Because years ago, Tyler Perry, who's quite well known, yes, has come out as a sex abuse survivor. Terry Crews, another actor, has come out. But it's a process. And again, when I'm asked, why am I doing this? Part of it is to legitimize the fact that men are victims, men are victimized, and men can also be survivors and eventually get on the other side of the abuse, heal, and thrive.
And thrive. Yep. You've now got through the first 2 segments of your 3-segment story.
Yeah. So the third one is this. So I got that master's degree, and I worked in community mental health. I worked with sex offenders. I worked with numerous populations, and I really liked it. My grandmother in Queens passed away a few years later. She left me some money. My partner and I, Tom, at the time, we wanted to do a business together. He had a family business that he had worked in for many years. I had run Frank's Bar in Washington. I had business experience, and we wanted to do something that would make a difference. Yes. And we're in Columbus, Ohio, 1995. It's a cow town, but it's getting better. Yes. There are gay businesses, there are gay nightclubs and bars and a gay restaurant, but everything's behind closed doors. There's no windows, nothing open to the public, all in the shadows. And we at the time were impressed with the Planet Hollywoods and the Hard Rock Cafes and the whole theme restaurant thing, the whole restaurant with a theme and a message. And it was very popular in the late 80s and early 90s, very popular. So we came up with the idea. I said to Tom one afternoon, I said, so Tom, what if Alexander the Great, Willa Cather, goodness gracious, the playwright, the UK playwright that's so great. What if these famous gays and lesbians throughout time, Eleanor Roosevelt and others, if they came around the table, what would they say to each other? What stories would they share? Yes, and that was the beginning and the seed of the idea for our restaurant out on Main. We wanted to do a restaurant that was all about empowerment. Yes, a key word in my story, empowerment. Yes, we wanted to have a place where LGBT people and their allies, who at the time we called hip heteros, yes, could come and feel safe, hold hands, and be empowered. And we had big murals of the LGBT story. We had a famous 50 mural of 50 individuals throughout time who have made a big difference. We had shadow box tables, vitrines with different aspects of the story. We had an Elton John costume from his 1980 concert in Central Park. Lilith Estridge's guitar, Greg Louganis' Speedos, Liberace costume from Las Vegas. I mean, we had all of it. We had the whole thing, and it was beautiful. And you can see pictures of it on my website as well as on my Facebook page, Michael Caven Writer. It was just a magnificent, beautiful little restaurant that could and did in the middle of nowhere, practically. And we opened in 1996 to wide acclaim. We were on CNN, all the local press. We just really pushed the envelope. But we had great food and great service because people will only come back for great food and great service. You can have a beautiful environment, but they'll only come back if you deliver the goods. During our 6-year run, we had many celebrities that came to visit. John Denver was our first celebrity that we served. We actually served him backstage at the Palace Theater. Our next big one was Grace Jones. Yes. Then Eartha Kitt. We did think we kind of had a thing about, former divas of a certain age, visiting us. Lots of authors over the years. Betty DeGeneres, Ellen's mom, would come once a year because she was doing activism at the time for her daughter and for the gay community. That's how wonderful that woman was and still is in her elderly age. And she'd say, "Oh, I'm going to bring Ellen someday. I want to bring Ellen. She's going to love it here. We're going to bring Ellen." And eventually she did. It was Betty's 70th birthday. Ellen was playing at the Palace Theater, and Ellen was like, "Where do you want to go to dinner tonight, Ma?" And she says, "Have I got the place for you, Ellen?" And Ellen calls us, and there we are. And for the first time in my career as a restaurateur, I was a bodyguard, keeping the groupies and everybody away from her posse so that they could have dinner. But afterward, Ellen couldn't have been more gracious. And Haysh, her then partner, was with her mom. I toured Ellen around the restaurant. She said, I had a vision of doing something like this when I first came out doing a cafe like this in LA. And look, these, celebrity stories. Of course, there's Tammy Faye Baker, which I mentioned at the start of this broadcast. Those were all great. But what meant the most to us, Doc, was our solo acts who became part of our extended family, became part of the Out on Main mosaic, our regulars who came in, who maybe didn't have family, didn't have partners, but became part of our extended family. And we really created something special. Also, we did themed dinners. We recreated the final meal served on the Titanic, and we announced it when the Titanic movie was nominated for all those awards. We were on, again, lots of ink. And back then it was ink because there was no internet. So it was all papers and newspapers and magazines for coverage. And we had this great thing going. And then unfortunately 9/11 happened, in 2001, and everybody stopped going out, and it just changed everything. And it was time for us to reconsider our plans. We had exceeded all of our expectations, and we felt that it was time to bring the curtain down. We had a buyer for the building. We did a 2-month notice so everyone could come in for their final meals, gave a full month's salary to our staff, and brought the curtain down on our terms. So that is the third part of my story, which is the restaurant. And in many ways, Dr. Hayes and listeners, the restaurant was my redemption. I felt really bad about the publicity that came from Bateman's trial, especially Vanity Fair equating pedophilia and homosexuality. I felt that that was very bad for the movement. And I felt that in many ways, the restaurant made up for that because we got so much great press. Tom and I were the it couple in Columbus. And we took great satisfaction knowing that young people who saw our story, saw that there's a happy ending, that gay people can be happy and not wind up in a bathtub slitting their wrists like that teacher had me doing. Oh my God. Talk about diametrically different. So, that's my legacy. And the restaurant it has been my legacy, yes. And now I suppose coming out with my story is the next part of my legacy. And I have to say to you and your listeners, it has not been easy. I mean, I have residual shame. And if you go to my Facebook and you see the the marquee, yes, of the three stories, Dallas, New Hampshire, and Columbus, you see three very different stories there. But for me, coming out and removing myself from the compartmentalization that was existing for me, my safety zone on the internet has been challenging. I have had residual shame. I've had to revisit the male survivor literature to, go ahead and brush up on managing that kind of shame.
Well, and
And I'm
if you're like most of us, I'm assuming you're like most of us human beings. When I was in grad school, they said, now you're going to find your core issues. That's we're going to help you do that in a couple of these groups and personal growth and development groups that we're doing. And once you find your core issues, you will take them with you to your grave. That's not in question. The only questions that you need to answer around that are you going to deny it and project it onto your image of someone else? Or are you going to own it, accept it, and learn to work with it so you get better and better at minimizing the negative effects in your life from those issues? And so every time I get stirred up to one of my core issues, it's an opportunity for me, you might say, to bring new presence to energies that once defeated me
very nice.
and do
Yes,
that at deeper and deeper levels as I learn to dismantle the negative and therefore false beliefs I hold about myself.
that's right. Absolutely. And we talk about we talk about the different versions of ourselves. And I think anybody who writes about their lives and goes back to their 20s and 30s, they see that that version is pretty different, hopefully, to the version today. One of the messages that I have for your listeners is that it does get better and you can find a way to be more comfortable in your skin. Yes, it does get better. And also, I want to send the message that if you are a young person or a minor watching this, and there is an adult in your life who is giving you too much attention, talk to another adult that you trust about that because their motivations may not be good. And if you are a minor that is engaged in a relationship with someone who is older, there are resources out there to help you, and that you have options and you're worth looking at those. You know, Alternatively, or at the same time, if you are a male survivor and you've been keeping this inside for a long time, and let's face it, 1 in 6 men, at least the science and the research is saying 1 in 6 are sexually abused. Yes, none want to talk about it. And society as a whole doesn't want to hear about it because of repulsion and also because of the knee-jerk reaction that the male should not have let it happen. And again, that's the overall message and my argument in doing these talks is that men are just as much victims as women, and we deserve compassion. And I ask your listeners to reconsider your views. If you never went through sexual abuse, if you know if you but if you have thoughts or convictions about it, and if perhaps you see men or boys or teen boys as less than victims, yes, reconsider that. Reconsider that, and remember that predators are pretty creative, and they're really good at convincing the victim that they deserve it, they asked for it, and in some cases, with the stimulation of the different things that predators use, make the young person feel like it was enjoyable. Yes, and unable to see the egregious perpetration that has taken place. So I hope that your listeners, wherever you're at, I hope that you can take from my story a sense of the resilience, never giving up, and also getting to the point. If I wouldn't be able to do this if I hadn't at some level forgiven myself for having let myself down over the years and not been my best friend and been a self-saboteur repeatedly on and on, which I do write about to some extent, that we do not need to be sabotaging ourselves anymore. We don't need to be making the same mistakes over and over again. There is help and there is support out there.
And you went out and went the next level. That a lot of people who've had trauma aren't equipped to do this, but you went ahead and got a master's and got training in psychology and therapy and And so let me ask you if there's a particular set of tools that you've learned, either that you learned in therapy when you were being the client, or that you've learned that you use with people that's helped you dismantle that pile of shame you were talking about.
Well, definitely, for sure. You know, and when I started practicing as a therapist here in Da Nang about a year ago, year and a half ago, which kind of coincided with my writing, I found it to be unexpected, and I found that I love it. I love being in the room with my clients, and it's all about them. It's all about my client, and I'm sharing the space with them. I'm honored that they're sharing the space with me. Yes, and the whole world just kind of drifts away. So that's my experience as a therapist. Yes, that I can be totally engaged with where my client is coming from, conditionally, unconditionally accepting them, as Carl Rogers says. Yes, but also in the same process, knowing that lots of their issues, were issues that I too had struggled with. And I think that the great news about therapy is that it works. You and I both know it works to have a safe place to express your feelings. And that was the thing, you asked about tools, finding a way to, in a healthy way, express anger, which I did. Howard and I, in the early days, we did a lot of anger work. My sessions were in the evening. There was nobody in his big building, and I could yell, I could scream, I could get it out, But one thing that I didn't know from my chaotic family life is that there are healthy ways to express anger, ways that don't hurt me and that don't hurt you or anybody else. And you too, out there, you can express your anger in healthy ways by talking about it, by putting words to what happened. Yes, and again, part of anger is getting it from inside and out,
Well,
getting it in.
and and one of the big things that we've learned over the years is that for most people, anger is a secondary emotion, and it's there to distract or numb us out from or help us feel more empowered than the pain, fear, and sadness that is almost always underlying it. And so,
Absolutely.
and so if I can be brave enough to face the pain, fear, and sadness underneath the anger starts to melt away. But as I'm operating from the fear or the belief that I won't survive facing the pain, fear, and sadness, I can rationalize a tremendous amount of anger and rage.
But that anger and that rage, comes back and it hurts us, right?
And so it's far more efficient in the work I've done with people over the years to help them understand that the pain, fear, and sadness is just information and energy, and they can breathe and have other techniques to help move through it. And then there's no need for the anger to defend because now I'm in direct connection and direct experience with these false negative beliefs about myself, and I'm understanding that they don't hold any power that I don't give them.
That's right. That's right. Absolutely. You're a gem, sir, because that's absolutely spot on. And it does bring up a lot for me thinking about it, because in the last few weeks, I've decided that although I'm not in crisis, there's nothing monumental, there are uncertainties. I've always been a big believer that therapists ought to get therapy and keep their house in order. So I've re-entered therapy. I filled out an intake recently, and it was humbling, because I'm usually the one having my clients fill out the intake. But I felt like at this point, I do need some more additional support. And let me tell you, the last few sessions I've had, by 22 minutes, I am crying.
And
Yes,
as long as you keep that willingness to keep looking at whatever upset comes up in you, then the potential to grow is infinite.
absolutely.
It's
Absolutely.
it's when I want to shut it down or say I'm done that the growth stops.
That's right. That's right. And what you do with your podcast and having people like me on and sharing your wisdom throughout the years is it helps us. It helps us to articulate, yes, so that the power is diminished of that anger and the rage, and that there can be a shifting to healing, yes, understanding, self-compassion, and hopefully at my age, some wisdom.
Well, and I encourage people to look into whatever tools resonate with them, right? So we've got
Mhm.
the double-edged sword of the internet and all of this connectivity is that a lot of good stuff can get out there and it can be misused and a lot of not so good stuff can be out there. But you can find resources for therapy that are wonderful, powerful tools. There's Byron Katie's work, there's Ho'oponopono, there's Diedrich Wolzak's work and his worksheet, there's Dr. Michael Rice's work and his worksheet, which is the foundation for the work that gave rise to Journey's Dream. There's the internal family systems work with Dick Schwartz and his books that any one of these that resonate with a person, they can step into either reading about them and or having a therapist coach them through that and develop the use of tools in their life that can facilitate the healing and speed the release and the dismantling of the shame-based beliefs. And that's why we encourage people to keep looking until you find something that resonates with your personality. I tell people on a regular basis when they come to see me, in order to have a therapy to have any chance of success, you need to have a therapist that knows what he or she is doing and a therapist with whom you're comfortable. Because you can have the very best therapist in the world, but if you're not comfortable with her, you won't go to her long enough that she can help you, and you won't tell her the things she needs to know to help you.
That's
On the
right.
other hand, you can have your very best friend in the world and be up till 3 or 4 in the morning, several nights a week, talking about everything that's ever bothered you. And while that's helpful, that person doesn't have the professional distance and the professional training to do for you what a therapy can.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And here in Central Vietnam, mental health and mental awareness, it's not really a thing. The government media, they do stories. I'm very impressed with the media and their coverage of psychological and mental health issues, transgender issues, gay issues, everything. I live in a country that's right down the middle. No red, no blue, no north, no south. It's just right down the middle. But it is also a challenge when there's a dearth of therapists. There's only one of me, and I'm the only English speaking therapist in Da Nang that does couples counseling, you know, and there's not enough counselors for the husband and the wife or the partner and the partner to have their own therapists. So what do? We try to maneuver as best we can, in an imperfect way so that everyone can get their needs met and get support. But you're right, Dr. Hayes, there is so much out there. There's great support out there, great options, ways to get help and to move, toward empowerment, and to move toward healing, and to move toward a more open and happy life with eyes wide open to this mosaic of the beauty and the ugliness of this world that we live in.
Well, I just want to thank you for being willing to tell your story and to advocate for male victims and survivors and help them move to the place of thriving.
Mm.
It's wonderful to know that people have, with all the pain that you have the courage to face it and to do that for your benefit and the benefit of others. I appreciate that.
Well, thank you so much, and thank you for having me on your podcast. On Your Mind plays an important role in the world, and thank you for your legacy of working with many, many, many clients over the years and helping them find healthful living, healing, and a better life. So, thank you, sir. It's been great to be with you. Great to be with everybody, and wherever you're at, take care. Yes, one step at a time. Be good to yourself, and just carry on.
Thank you so much. Michael Caven is a visionary restaurateur who co-founded the USA's first LGBT-themed restaurant Out on Main in Columbus, Ohio. Prior to Out on Main, Michael Caven was enmeshed in the gay bar empire soap opera of his adopted father, mogul Frank Caven, in Dallas, Texas. Michael Caven was also the main student witness in the New Hampshire pornography trial of his former high school teacher, Larry Lane Bateman, ensuring that Bateman was permanently removed from the education system, including his final position at Phillips Exeter Academy. Michael Caven is semi-retired in Central Vietnam and is a business communications specialist at the University of Economics in Da Nang, as well as a practicing clinical counselor at Psychologist Vietnam Mental Health Clinic. He's currently spearheading Vietnam's suicide prevention hotline. Michael earned a BFA from Southern Methodist University and a Master's of Science in Education from the University of Dayton. Michael Caven received the Equality Award from the Human Rights Campaign, the Living Legend Award from Audi magazine. His memoir, Spilling the Tea, is in development. Please note that this interview covers rather intense topics related to child abuse, sexual abuse of children, and child pornography, as well as Michael's work to recover from the abuse he sustained earlier in life and his work to advocate for male victims of sexual abuse.
You've been listening to the On Your Mind podcast, offered by Journey's Dream, where we support people through mental health challenges to a place of true and lasting well-being. If you love our show, we invite you to visit onyourmindpodcast.org to join the conversation, access the show notes, and discover our helpful resources. Thank you for listening.